All right, so this is part 2 of the lecture for week 5, and we're going to look at the publisher's PowerPoint presentation. And what I shared with you mirrors pretty closely what this presentation goes through. So we'll do this little overview for 2 slides, and then we'll just jam through this all pretty quickly. Discuss the functions of the operating system. It makes the system operate, manages the hardware, provides a user interface. It gives you a way to manage your folders and files. It provides security, right? Explain the most popular operating systems for personal use: Windows, Mac, OS X, iOS, Android, Linux, right? Explain the different kinds of operating systems for machines, networks, and businesses. So, there's personal machines, PCs. There's network operating systems allow many users to use the same machine. There's business servers, right, running Linux. Explain how the operating system provides a means for users to interact with the computer. It's the graphical user interface. Used to be the command line interface. Explain how the operating system helps manage hardware such as processor, memory, storage, and peripheral devices. It's like a conductor, right? It's organizing all the parts to work together. It says who, what, does what, when, how fast, how much. Explain how the operating system interacts with application software through APIs, application programming interfaces. And, that's the OS is the interface between application software and hardware. Discuss the process the operating system uses to start the computer and how errors in the boot process are handled. When we learned a diagrammed kind of computer remembering, there's the motherboard, and then on the motherboard's the CPU, and inside the CPU are cache and registers, and then there's random access memory, and that's all primary storage. And then out here, secondary storage, which is non-volatile, and that's solid state storage, magnetic storage, and optical storage, right? So your hard disk drive, your solid state drive, your DVDs, your CDs, all out here, secondary storage. And then over here on the motherboard, there's also ROM, read-only memory. And on ROM is stored BIOS, basic input-output software. So when the computer turns on, BIOS loads into RAM, allows the computer to know how to talk to the hard drive, which then starts loading the operating system. And so that's how discuss the process the operating system uses to start up the computer and how errors in the boot process are handled. Errors when they arise, there could be beep codes. So sometimes if you're starting a computer and there's an error, it'll beep and then it might stop booting. But the beeps, you could count the beeps and then look up on a different computer. What does 4 beeps mean in Windows 10 when I'm starting my computer? Or for a Dell Latitude, what's it mean, right? And it'll tell you whatever the meaning is. Describe the main features of the Windows interface. I don't know. We'll see a picture of that here in a second. Summarize how the operating system helps keep your computer organized and manages files and folders. Well, it provides file management. You kind of saw that. There's hierarchical file management. Outline the tools used to enhance system productivity, backup files, and provide accessibility. We'll see some examples of that too. So, operating system fundamentals, system basics, right? System software. So if we look at that one picture of what is software, we have system software is made up of operating system utilities and drivers. And so system software is made up of operating system utilities and drivers. They didn't list drivers. Operating system functions manages computer's hardware, allows application software to work with CPU, and it manages and schedules and coordinates tasks. Yep, we already know all that. And it provides a user interface. And then different categories of, whether it's graphical user interface or command line interface, different categories of operating systems. There could be single user or multi-user operating systems, right? Or single process or multi-process operating systems. So doing one thing at a time versus many things at a time. And so here are some of the common operating systems. You can pause the video and take a look at those. And again, looking at common operating systems for personal computers, mobile and web-based. So you can pause the video and look at those if you want. And then it talks about Linux, right? And then, real-time operating system, machine that performs repetitive series of specific tasks in precise time. Multi-user operating system allows many users to use the same machine. And it coordinates and directs the flow of data and information, right? So there's all these different components, what that graphic shows you. And the operating system is coordinating what is happening when. And so there's another example of that coming up, like right here. Like there could be many things happening, and there'll be interrupts, right, to kind of say, oh, that needs to stop happening right now so that something else could happen. So that's part of how it does it. And so here's about user interfaces, whether it's command line, command-driven interface, or graphical user interface. And then memory and storage management. So operating system manages memory and storage. And then if memory is getting full, it could start storing things on the hard drive as if it was memory, as if it was in RAM, and they call that virtual memory, but then that really slows things down. So you want to have more RAM if possible. If you're your computer's going slow, more RAM could help. Hardware and peripheral device management. So that's another thing the operating system does, is it manages hardware and peripheral devices. And a lot of devices you should just be able to plug them in and play, and they should play, so plug and play. And the driver is what drives different pieces of hardware. So we talked about that with printers. If you get a printer, you could download the software to make that printer work, and that's called the driver. It drives that piece of hardware. And then here we learn about APIs, and so we already kind of talked about that an operating system will have an API. And you could look for even Twitter. You could say Twitter API, right? And documentation API. And so if you wanted to program something to interface with Twitter, you could look at Twitter's API. And then here's the code that Twitter provides to allow developers to create applications that work with Twitter, right? Well, same with your operating system. There's code that allows developers to create things to work with that operating system, and they provide APIs. So this is how it boots up. CPU activates BIOS, right? Stored permanently in ROM. There's a power on self test where you'll get those beep codes, and it tests components of the computer and compares results with configuration information in CMOS. And CMOS is where how ROM is stored and where BIOS is stored. So that's kind of confusing, but ROM is made up of CMOS and BIOS is stored on ROM, which is made up of CMOS. So it's weird that they use all three of those. And then they load the operating system in RAM once BIOS is up and running, and OS is loaded from the hard drive, and kernel, the core part, the kernel is the core part of the operating system, it always stays in memory. It always stays in RAM. So it's called memory resident. It never leaves until you turn your computer off. And then configuration and customization settings are checked and start screen display. So configuration settings would come out of something called the registry. And so here are those steps kind of explained a little bit more. If you want to read through those, you can pause the video. And if you want to read through those, you could pause the video there. And here is basics of how Windows looks. And we should all be pretty familiar with this from the trainings in my IT lab. And you could pin things, right? You could right click a file and pin it to your start bar, your taskbar, start menu or taskbar. And Mac OS and Windows are not compatible with each other, right? You need software written for each of them, but they're similar. Nor is Linux compatible with any of those, but we already learned about Linux. And then file structure. It's really important to learn how to manage files well. And the cloud has really made things amazing. So I store everything in a cloud drive file with Google. It's called Google Drive. You could also do it with Microsoft. But then all my files are uploaded to the cloud, to their computers online. So if I ever am somewhere else on some other computer, I could access all my files. Or if my computer gets stolen, right, I just change all my passwords, and I still have access to everything. So that's kind of a really nice thing. If you haven't figured out how to do that yet, check out Google Drive, and you could download a folder onto your computer and store everything in that folder and create subfolders and subfolders in that main folder, and then everything gets uploaded to the web for you automatically and synced to the web. You can work on it anywhere. It's super handy. And then you have everything backed up. So files and folders and the file path, right? Here's a file path up here, just, on the web. And, it kind of just says, where is this thing located? So if I go to my downloads and I click up there, you could see I could right click. Does it copy that? What happens if I do that? That didn't do it. But, here's the main drive, and then this folder, and inside that folder is this folder, and inside this folder is that folder, right? So it's like this nesting of folders. It's called a hierarchical directory. And then, Windows File Explorer is kind of what I've been opening to look at all those folders and files. And then, we already saw how you could do file management and change the view and see the file name extensions right there, right? We saw that. And different file extensions and what they're for, what kind of documents they're for. And then copying, moving, and deleting files is definitely a skill you need, and we're learning that in Canvas. And file compression, shrinks the size of a file so you could send it to somebody, and then they unzip it, uncompress it when they receive it. In utility programs like firewalls, zip, file compression utilities, antivirus software, all important. And system performance utilities, you could search for disk cleanup in Windows, and it'll get rid of things that you aren't using and free up space on your machine. In backup utilities, we talked about Google Drive, and then there's accessibility utilities, right, which make your computer easier to use. So that's week 5, and it's all about operating systems. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you continue to drive forward and show up. I'm glad you continue adding drops to the bucket. You are engaged in the noblest of all activities. You are improving your life. If everybody was to apply themselves as you are applying yourself, the world would be a better place, right? If we all strove to improve ourselves and to become our best self, and to learn and to become more knowledgeable and more understanding, to have better skills, this world would be much better. So I commend you for what you're doing. You're engaged in the noblest of all endeavors, right? Improving yourself. And as you realize success in life, you will then be able to help others. And that's how we survive and thrive as a species. So you're doing great. By showing up, you're doing great. By watching this lecture, you're doing great. By learning skills, you're doing great. Just keep doing it. That's life, right? Unless you win the lottery or you're born into royalty, you got to work. And we got to make money. So might as well apply ourselves and become good at something and enjoy it while we're doing it, right? And even if you were rich beyond measure, born to royalty, or won the lottery, you still want to have meaning and purpose. You still want to do something to contribute to our species, to our civilization, right? You want your life to be more than sitting on a beach drinking daiquiris. You want to contribute and have value. You want to work and do something and create something and build something. That's the greatest work of all, is to create and to build. And so that's what you're engaged in. And we're all going to work, whether or not we're punching that clock for a minimum wage job somewhere, and also showing up for school. Just keep working and enjoy it. And that's the noblest of all endeavors when you're educating yourself and improving your skill set. So good on you, as the Australians say, for doing what you're doing. And just keep doing it. Keep adding those drops. You're going to realize success. Persistently, patiently, you are bound to succeed. See you next week.